Microsoft is, or see Ballroom's coming out and touting, developers, 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 right? And so like the question I have is really, okay, that's me. I run a little creative agency. You'll find out a little bit more about me as I go on. So the question is open source a developer's world, right? And like, I think you could make the case that in a lot of ways it is. Because really you can't do open source. Well, open source really comes out of code, right? And the people that can code are in charge, and the people that can't code are the whiners, right? And so is open source, does it have to be a developer's world? And whatever. So like, to get kind of a sense, I mean, how many people in here right now are developers? Okay, we've got a handful. How many are creatives, quote unquote? Oh, sweet. Okay. I mean, that's like more creatives than I would typically expect at a Linux conference. So you guys are awesome. So like, but how many of you fit into some other bucket? You're not a developer. Tell us. Founder. Sorry? Founder. A founder? So a business person? Yeah. Okay. What other kind of buckets do we have? Technical writer. A technical writer? All right. So you're a contributor? Technical writer. All right. All right. So we have some representation here. So is FOSS developer's world? I don't think it needs to be. So what do creatives have to offer? Now, I hate the term creatives. I'm only using it because there's not really a better term, but creatives is kind of a term that people give to themselves when they do video production, graphic design. It's just kind of a catch-all for a lot of creative tasks. Because clearly, you can't be creative unless you're making pretty pictures. Being sarcastic. But like, so when I talk creatives, I'm really talking more about people that call themselves creatives, which is kind of your designer kind of audience. And then photographers, videographers, kind of that audience. So what does a creative have to offer an open source project? Well, creative people do useful things, right? They can help market open source projects. They can help with interfaces. They can help produce videos to promote it, right? They have a lot of things to offer. And open source can be better from greater involvement of creatives. I'm just kind of assuming that going into this. If you don't agree with me, I'll meet you out in the parking lot. All right, so if you can read this, you're not supposed to read the gray ones necessarily, but really there are three things that I've identified as important challenges to getting creatives involved. And those are ignorance and bias, feature gaps, and inertia. So we're gonna go through those. Now, let me refer to my notes here, make sure. Okay, so my story, I'm a professional designer, art director, marketer. I've been doing it professionally for over 15 years. Well, about 15 years. So, been doing it a long time. Now, of that span, only the last handful have I really been using open source at all. In fact, I didn't really even know what open source was. When I was younger, I worked at Staples to pay my way through college, and glamorous job. And they had a license of, it must have been Mandrake Linux or something. Like, I can't even remember what it was, but you could buy a copy of Linux. It was like always like this intriguing thing, right? And so later on, when I left my marketing job to start a creative agency, I was building a new computer. And one of the options when I was building it is I could have it installed with Windows and this thing called Ubuntu, right? I'm like, ooh, what's that? So like, I went and found out and like, oh wow, this is kind of cool. So I ordered it with Ubuntu installed. I was Ubuntu 12, I think. And so like, I didn't get very far into it. It was intriguing to me, but really like, I think for me as a creative person, what drew me in the most was this thing, and I don't know if any of you recognize it. It's a big buck bunny, right? It's been seen a million times, and it's on marketing collateral all over the place because the images and video are all like freely licensed. So like you see it all over the place. But Big Buck Bunny, it's a project by the Blender project. I don't know which of their entities it would be classified under now, but basically it was built a 3D animation program that's free if you aren't familiar with it. So that was kind of the cool, intriguing thing for me. So, but like a lot of creatives kind of find themselves in this issue. Like they don't know about open source. They're not programmers. You know, like they don't know that PHP is open source. They don't know about Linux. They don't use it. They're probably on a Mac, wearing a beret and, you know, painting on a canvas and looking all artsy, right? No, like it's just not something that we're familiar with. So there's the first big obstacle that we face to get more creatives involved is we have to make sure they know about it. And then some of the people that know about it have some bias about it. They'll say, well, that's just for amateurs, right? Real professionals pay lots of money, right? So I'm going to tell a little story, but I've got 3 possible solutions for this. So I'm going to tell a quick little story. I got introduced into computer graphics because my art teacher spent his money to buy a copy of Photoshop. And, you know, he installed it on this piece of crap computer in his art studio that was the school had given him to put grades in, right? But he was really invested in his students and wanted to give them an opportunity to experience these new things. Now, this was like Photoshop 3. This was a long time ago. And that was my first exposure. Now, I did what every future incredibly amazing artist does when they get their hands on Photoshop. I put my face on a dollar bill. So, you know, this picture is Alcatraz. This is where my mom thought I was going when I showed her my very authentic dollar bill with my face on it. But the reason to tell the story is that in order to get people, if I had been exposed instead of to Photoshop, but to Inkscape and GIMP, that's what I would have been using. I ended up using Photoshop professionally for almost 2 decades. And like, it was comfortable, it was what I knew. When I started doing graphic design, I mean, I trained in architecture. When I started doing graphic design, I was cheating, I didn't have a degree. I was designing business cards in Photoshop because it was the tool I knew. And like, the printer was really nice and explained to me this whole CMYK color thing, and I just, oh wow, this is amazing, and I discovered all these other applications. But if I had been introduced early, I would have been using free and open source software instead of proprietary software. And so the simplest thing that we can do is get free and open source software in front of kids, right? Get in high school. There are a lot of benefits. Schools are perpetually underfunded. Educate the teachers about, hey, you can teach your kids computer graphics. You don't have to work out some special deal with Adobe. There are a lot of ways we can do this. So like the question is, you know, do our websites for our open source projects reflect this reality? Do we have a section for educators that explain these benefits? If not, we can do that. Another problem is when I explain to people, hey, you know, I did this in Krita. Sorry. Or I did this in Scribus, or I did this in Blender or GIMP, right? They don't know what the crap I'm talking about. I imagine what they're thinking I'm talking about is some band from the 80s, some heavy metal band. This is the band Blender, or Krita, right? No, sorry. But like, they have no idea, they have no frame of reference to know what I'm talking about. And part of the reason is we don't really get outside of our spheres, right? Like, we're at a Linux conference talking about this stuff, and most of you probably know what those applications are. So if we're going to get more creatives involved, we need to kind of break out of the bubble. And the bubble is our own little communities where we talk to our own people that already know these things. If we want graphic designers to be involved, we need to find out about the local chapter meetings for EIGA, right? We need to get a booth in SIGGRAPH if we're trying to reach 3D artists. And that's happening. But like, we have to break out of our bubble. Okay, another thing. When you go to order a hamburger, you know, this is what you see, right? It's an amazing, juicy hamburger. How many have ever gotten a burger that looked like that? All right. Afterward, I'm going to talk to you and find out where that was. So I never have. Shanghai. Yeah, like they don't look like this, right? So why do marketers put these images on the menu? Because that's the burger I imagine I'm eating. When I open up that bag, I don't want to imagine this greasy little smash thing. Like I'm imagining I'm eating this thing. And so part of the thing that we need to do is create projects. We do need to care about appearances, right? Now the reality is, maybe our project has a lot of aspiring artists, a lot of amateurs, a lot of people of varying skill levels. That's awesome. But when we're presenting our project, we need to present our very best work. We want them to imagine what the potential is that they can achieve, not just the reality of what most people are doing with Inkscape or what most people are doing with GIMP. So appearances do matter. And it's not just some vain thing. It does, in fact, actually affect people's experience with the project. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit quick. Ignorance and bias, we talked about this. Okay, the next thing I'm going to look at, I'm going to tell a little story. I brought this as a case study. This is the first project that I did complete with open source. Start to finish, everything. It started, and it doesn't present here very well, but I started in Krita, and I did these concept sketches for a client that does these little computers for defense projects, right? And we were going to do it in 3D, and I wanted to sketch it out. So I did this ugly little sketch in Krita. And then we, brought the models in, and we did a bunch of stuff in Blender, like this mesh and, this 3D modeling. It was really cool. Then we brought it into Darktable because it has non-destructive, filters so that we could really play with the tuning. And then we did some compositing in GIMP to you see how the sand changes color. We brought in the image from here and did some masking. And then finally went into Inkscape to add some text elements and generate the print PDF. And here they are, a couple of them. I'll be honest with you. There were a few steps along the way that I was really ready to quit. And I'm this really die hard, live forever, Viva free software, right? And I'm thinking, oh man, if I just open up my virtual machine and open up Adobe, no one will know, and I'll just get this done in 5 minutes, and it'll be okay. But I didn't do it. But the reality is, the process is a little bit awkward. So how do we solve that, right? So assuming that we overcome the ignorance, people know about it, they need to be able to use it. So for developers, the idea, and let me just kind of keep tabs on my time here, make sure I'm not, okay, we're good. So if you're a developer, the developers in here, you probably have an idea of how to file a good bug report, right? You kind of know what information you need to be able to repeat the problem and so on, right? So you explain the idea of a bug report to somebody that's not a developer, and it kind of feels like this. It feels like this perilous journey where you're going to get scolded for labeling your bug report wrong. Oh, this needs to be labeled triage, or this isn't a feature request, this is a whatever, right? I don't know. You might not. If you look at how a lot of these bug reporting systems end up, it's just full of these people getting scolded for not filing the right bug report. Okay, so if we're going to close the gap, we need to close this divide between the problems that people have and the things that need to get fixed. The features they need and what the developers need to know to create those features, right? There's a huge divide there, and a lot of the breakdown happens in that tightrope. Because I'll be honest, I contribute, oh no, Ted's back there. So I do a lot of work for the Inkscape project, and there's this persistent bug where I can't get the black to turn 100% black. It just won't ever do it. And, or it's actually a opacity issue. I have never filed a bug for it. I just deal with it every time I touch that program, and it drives me nuts. But the problem is, it's hard. So we have to close that gap. The other thing that we have to do is we have to change a mindset that people have. So you need to recognize that the people using this software, this is what they're used to. Okay? It's a grocery store aisle. This is how software is delivered to them. Okay? You go, it's in a pretty package. You open it up. Wait, something smells funny. Oh, this is terrible. I'm taking it back. Okay, you go back to the grocery store, they'll say, oh, well, why don't you just redesign the chip manufacturing process so that these don't turn out bad once in a while? Like, it's a completely foreign project, right? The people that we're providing this software to are accustomed to kind of a consumer mindset. And we have to change this mindset. And that change is actually quite liberating. With proprietary software, it's either good or not. You know, it either works or it doesn't. There's really not much you can do. But with free software, you're not just a consumer, but you're also a co-creator. Now, you might not be a developer, but you're co-creating this project by doing what we just talked to, by lodging bug reports, by suggesting features. And that's actually a really liberating concept. You're not just a victim of somebody's bad software, you're somebody that's going to help make it better. But that takes a mindset change, right? And we have to kind of go into it knowing that what people expect is a packaged product on a shelf. And we need to be patient with them when they start whining about it, because that's what the world has trained them to do. All right. This is an example of something that I really love. This is a screenshot from YouTube. These are a bunch of videos. You know, you probably can't read it, but like 5 months ago, Blender came out with a whole series of kind of these introductory videos. And none of them are very long. They're like 4 to 10 minutes. But the thing is, it's one condensed linear course to learn almost all the important features. You're not going to be a pro, but you can get off the ground. You can figure out whether to right click or left click in Blender, right? And you can learn the basics to get off the ground. So free software doesn't become perfect overnight. There are going to be gaps for like somebody like me trying to create a bunch of things. I'm going to have to find these weird workarounds, right? And so in the interim between when they lodge their feature requests or their bug reports and those get fixed, what we need to provide for people are resources to learn how to get actual stuff done. And so in order for us to, you know, close this feature gap temporarily, we need to dedicate resources. And this goes beyond just documentation. I don't want to hear another, it just doesn't work to say, go read the manual. Okay, because people don't have to do that with anything else in their life. My car's leaking oil, go read the car manual. It's just not how we're accustomed to work. We need to make these resources accessible to people to help them close the gap. And I think Blender is probably one of the best examples right now doing that. Okay, so ignorance bias, feature gaps, inertia. Okay, this is probably the most difficult issue and probably one of the most important things for us to recognize. Can anyone remind me, inertia, what's inertia? Resistance to change. Object in motion will stay in motion, object at rest stays at rest, right? Basically, it's Newton's way of explaining this, okay? When a train's moving, it's going to keep moving, right? You put something in front of that train, not good, all right? It takes a lot of opposing force to keep that train from moving, but the reality is human behavior is a lot like this train. Okay, the people that I'm promoting free software to already have a workflow to do what they need to do. And they might have some problems with it, but they're already doing it somehow. So changing human behavior from this course, this inertia of their life, is actually really difficult. But there are ways that we can do it. We have to introduce an external force, okay? So the nice thing is, okay, Adobe, Autodesk, if you're watching, I'm talking about you, they've already kind of solved this problem for us with software subscriptions, okay? But the problem with software subscriptions is this picture, you might not know what it is. This is some feudal lord, and, you know, I found it on Wiki Commons or something. But basically, the idea is this, okay? With a software subscription, it's kind of like the old feudal system. You never own land. The land's not yours to have. You can use it under these conditions, and if you don't fulfill these conditions, it's my land again. and you're kicked off, right? It's an oppressive way of delivering software to people, in my opinion. And it actually is the thing that irked me enough to make me deal with the discomforts of learning new operating systems and learning new software, because it really was just irritating to me that in 2 years from now, I have to have a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. 5 years from now, I have to have a subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. Forever, if I ever want to open some project that I did a long time ago, even if I let the subscription expire, I need to go back to Adobe and pay them to open my own work. Okay? So Adobe, and now Autodesk is following suit, has created this problem for us. And we need to recognize that it's a real problem that we can capitalize on, because free software offers a great alternative to that. So we need to rescue subscribers. Okay? The other thing, there's a guy that you might recognize, some of you might not. I don't know how familiar you are, but we'll see. Who knows who this is? Richard Stallman, right? If you don't know who Richard Stallman is, he's this really eccentric, like, pioneer of free software, right? And depending on who you're talking to, they totally love him, or some people think he's totally crazy. But the reality is, what Richard Stallman is advocating are these principles of free software. This principle of freedom. And this is something that we can appeal to when we're talking about software. We can appeal to higher ideals, okay? Now, a certain number of people will only make decisions based upon what's pragmatic. You know, they're only going to use whatever saves them the most time. But a lot of people actually have principles. And among those principles are that they value their freedom. Other principles that people value is wellness of other people, right? And that's an amazing thing that free software can do. You're helping yourself, but in the meantime, at no expense to you, you're helping anyone on the planet. And it's kind of this open, altruistic ideal that free software can provide for people. And it's something that we can put forward. Okay, the last item on this, talking about inertia. How do we break this inertia? It's not enough, so I'll tell a little anecdote. Let me check my time. Okay, we have time. So I know a guy, he's a 3D artist. He works at this game company. And he's using Blender, and everyone's like, har, 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 it's the guy that likes Blender, right? Well, the thing is, he's doing all this texturing, and he's getting his stuff done faster than everyone else. And the boss says, what are you doing? He's like, oh, well, I'm using Blender, and it's got this cool, texture mapping capability. And the boss says, you know what? From now on, everyone has to use Blender. Right? So, like, the thing is, part of the problem with free software is that oftentimes we're kind of a little short-sighted. Oftentimes, we're maybe not short-sighted is the right term, but our view is kind of at, like, alternatives. You see a lot of, like, imitationware, right? And I use it, and it's free, and I much prefer it over the commercial alternatives, but really it has nothing to offer except it's basically some commercial program, but just the free version. For us to really, and that's not going to be enough for us to change the inertia of people's lives. We will always, if we only are trying to reach some level of parity with the commercial alternatives, we will always be behind. What we need to do is rethink our problem and focus our attention on the ultimate problem, the problems that our audience has. So here, is an image of kind of a contemporary example, right? SpaceX landing these boosters, right? So instead of, let's just dump these big, expensive rockets out in the ocean, say, well, wait, that's where we're spending a lot of money. Why don't we just land them? Even though it's really hard. But, like, the thing is, we need to look beyond parity. This is the promise open software claims, right? We say that the wisdom of the crowd is greater than the wisdom of a few experts, right? That when we open up the process, we get better things. Now, part of the reason we don't sometimes end up with better things are some of the items we talked about before. We might not be connected with really the needs of our audience. We may have a small team of developers who really, they're tackling the issues they run into, but they're just not really connected with those bigger problems. But for us to break that inertia, to get people's train to stop or change course, we're going to have to look beyond parity. And there are some great examples of this. I mean, Blender, what they're doing with, Blender is a great example, right? Like, does Blender ever go, well, let's make this just like Maya, or let's just do this like Max? I mean, they almost don't do it annoyingly, like they refuse to change the right click to the left click or whatever, right? But like, what do? They create these open movie projects. They basically say, this is the problem we want to solve. We want to do something that, right now they're working on some kind of 2D animation thing. Earlier they were working on, basically, I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically every movie project has some ambitious goal, and then they try to do it, and they break their software all over, and they create the features they need to have. And that's a view that's not looking at what is Maya doing or what is Max doing, that's looking at what can we create? And that's the promise that we have to offer. Okay, so if we do this, people will know to use it. If we do this, they can use it. If we do this, they will use it, okay? So does this need to be a developer-only world? Should it be a developer-only world? No, absolutely not. Creatives have a lot to offer, and they can really help us make our software better. They can help us get our software to a larger audience. So there you go. Steve Ballmer is now rocking out with the band Blender. So let's get to work, and let's do it. And thank you. If you have any questions. And here's my contact info. If you want to see some of the work done professionally, you can see it down at the bottom. I'd love to, if you want to email me, I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts or questions, and we'll answer some here. And if you want to connect on Twitter or Mastodon, those are my contact things. Okay, question?
So sometimes when I talk to creatives, I get the feeling that they don't feel like they have skill sets outside of the Adobe products. Like, I want to just shake them and say, no, you're a great logo designer. You're not a Photoshop jock. You can do this. Like they tied their entire skill set to those tools. Do you have any advice for how to talk to people about, understanding their skills outside of the Adobe realm?
I think the first step is to show them, give them inspiration of what can be done outside of that. I mean, I would say your best designers recognize that a tool is a tool. I think your very best are not tethering their future to some Adobe program application. Part of the problem, I think the real problem though is it's more of it's a problem that has to do with this relationship between our educational institutions and commercial institutions, where the business is saying, oh, I need, some hiring manager doesn't really know anything about this stuff. And say, well, what do I put on this job requirement? Oh, well, they need to be proficient in Adobe Creative Suite. I've seen that a million times. Like, what does that even mean? That's like 30 programs. So that's part of what's happening. I think there's more of a pull. But as far as the individual creatives, I think if you show them better, they can do better. Now, if anyone want to come by the Inkscape and GIMP booth, we did some cool banners. I used some works from some other people and put those together. I am an amateur at Inkscape. And I'm an amateur at GAMP. I'll openly admit it, but I think they turned out okay. And so, hey, you don't really need to know all the features in Inkscape, but you can do great work. Does that kind of answer it-ish? Any other questions? He'll bring you a mic, I guess. Thanks, Micah.
Thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to say I really, really enjoyed what you had to say because I think for me it connected a lot to what the bigger picture is, what people are trying, and the vision they see with open software. So I love that. I kind of just wanted to know what brought you to do this. Like, what is your, you know, I know you said that you were fascinated by using it, but I'm actually interested to hear maybe if you have something you'd like to connect to, or what you're kind of propelling you forward with connecting with this type of project.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's changed a little bit. In the beginning, well, beginning-ish, there was a point where I used Linux for a long time, and I was just doing my Adobe stuff in a VirtualBox, and then, yeah, that's how it was working. I kind of gave up and went back to safe Windows. And then, but like, there was one mandatory restart too many. And it just shut off on me when I had some work on. I'm like, this is it. This is where I draw the line, no more. Microsoft, you may not shut my computer off without my consent anymore. And so I went back to Linux, and I just toughed through it. So like, for me, there was that moment of, you know, no. The other I alluded to was really Adobe's switch from offering any kind of proprietary or perpetual license. Like, to me, it's just, and I'm trained in marketing. I went to school in marketing. As much as they want to spin it, that this is somehow better for you, that's not why they're doing it. It's not why they're bringing in record profits. It doesn't help you. It's not for you. And so for me, seeing that really was the impetus. Now, what kind of changed for me, though, like, that's enough to maybe get me, like, using it. But what's kind of kept me and made me a little bit more involved and want to be involved in the Inkscape project and donating time, driving down to Los Angeles from Salt Lake City. You know, what for me, the promise of open software is that, you know, once I've been liberated, once I've felt what it's like to be free, I want other people to be able to be free. And to do that, there is a gap, right? There are not a lot of professionals that are able to use free software for their entire workflow, at least. And so I want to kind of bring about that change. And I love the idea, again, and I alluded to it, I love the idea that if I'm helping myself, and I'm helping the people I like, the people in part of a community, my close peers, I'm ultimately helping anyone on the planet. I don't care, it doesn't matter how poor you are, if you can find some way to scrap together some old hardware. You can install Linux, GNU Linux. Sorry, Richard. You can install GNU Linux, you can install Inkscape, and you can get to work creating something and sharing it. That's, for me, really what's kind of motivated me.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. All right. Thank you. I'll be at the Inkscape booth, 213. You can come chat. You can see our stuff. If you want to become a contributor, we have a little list. You can put your name on there, whether that's a programming or some other contribution. Come and say hi. Thank you.